Welcome to the install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. We're happy to have you in for another episode. Greg, did not go the professional football teams, local professional football teams way this weekend in Landover, Maryland, but it's just one of those games. You and I talked offline about it, just one of those games.
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously a team like Tennessee, just being realistic, doesn't have a big margin for error in games. And when you get two fumbles in the first quarter and all of a sudden it's 21 nothing, and before it seems like you've gotten settled, and then it's 28 nothing early in the second quarter, you just know it's not going to end well. But I thought, and we'll get to this, I actually thought, given the nature of the game, I thought that Will Levis actually played pretty well. And I think there's been kind of an incremental progress in his play. Now, again, we don't know what the organization thinks of him. He's the kind of quarterback, just being totally honest about him. And again, I'm not sitting here suggesting he'll be a top 10 quarterback or anything like that. But the way in which he plays, he needs team. And right now there's not enough team. So he's going to have some good moments, and we can go through a few of those because I thought there were some good moments in this game. And he may have some bad moments, but those are few and far between. I mean, he is not making the kinds of plays that he used to make where you'd kind of scratch your head and go, really? Is that what you want to be doing as an NFL quarterback? Those moments, I think, they're going away a bit. Wouldn't you agree?
No, absolutely. I would agree. I think, he carries himself differently with us at the press conferences. I think he's approaching his work in a different manner, or at least with a revised approach after, missing the 3 games, sitting back, watching Mason Rudolph, getting some time to decompress, kind of like Anthony Richardson, kind of like Bryce Young
Yep.
talked about with these younger guys who have struggled. And frankly, Greg, he's been back in the lineup for about a month now, and it's incremental. We talk about baby steps
Yeah.
every time I feel like we talk about Will Levis, but still it's 61.7% completing his passes, 960 yards, 7 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, a 101.3 rating in these 4 games since he's been back. It's solid. It's not good enough to win yet, but it's solid, which is about as
Well,
much as
it's
we could
funny you
ask
say
for.
that because obviously they only won the one game. Um, and I guess now he's probably about at a full season's worth of NFL starts, right? Isn't he right about there?
Yeah, Sunday was his 18th start.
Okay, so he's basically now started essentially a full season. And because this season was interrupted, it's hard to get a true feel because he missed time. But there's no question that since he's been back, that he has the look of a professional quarterback. The team's not good enough, obviously, to win a lot of games. But he does have the look. Now, I'm sure because he's a smart kid, as you know, that there's a lot of things going through his head. I'm sure that, he's wondering if the organization sees him as the future. He knows they're probably going to have a top 10 pick, maybe even a top 5 pick, depending on how the rest of the season plays out. And I'm sure he thinks on occasion, gee, what happens if they want to draft a quarterback? All these things go through his head. Obviously, the organization does not need to say anything, nor should they. This is not the time. And they probably won't say anything until it's draft day either, because there's
Yeah.
no need to. Um, but the point is he's the kind of quarterback because essentially he's a pocket quarterback. I mean, can he run straight in a fast line? Yeah, but he's not a creator. He's not one of those guys. He's a pocket player. And so he needs a couple of pocket quarterbacks to be really good in this league, need a couple of things. Number one, they need a good O line. It's still a significant work in progress. And I'm being totally honest, and I know I've spoken highly of him when he came out, but I think Latham has been very up and down. I think that he's had some good moments, but he's struggled a little too much in pass pro, in my opinion, based on tape. So the O line has been an issue. You need a consistent run game. That's what he needs. For the most part, it's been good. Because Pollard, I think, in the overall context of this season, Buck Pollard's had a very good year. Um, I think you need a defense that keeps everything together. For the most part, that's been relatively the case. But and one area which I think he clearly needs to improve, and it's so surprising because sometimes it's phenomenal and sometimes it's mind-boggling, is just the ball placement. He still misses a few too many routine easy throws. And sometimes they're even completions, but the ball's placed in the wrong spot.
Yeah.
And it takes away run after catch, which could turn a 7-yard play into a 25-yard play. You
Yeah.
know. So but I think there's, again, I'm not sitting here and I don't want people listening to think, oh, I'm saying that Will Levis next year, if he's a starter, is going to be a top 10 guy. We don't know any of that. But I think there's clearly been a sense that, you know what, you can line up and play with this guy.
Yeah, and five more opportunities, including this coming Sunday, to continue that evaluation process, and we'll see where the chips fall as far as the draft order. Certainly, that conversation is going to be an interesting one come
And
this
just one
offseason.
quick point about this game coming up, because
Yeah,
there's not a lot to say, but and we can move on. But they are playing a team that does have two quality edge pass rushers. So, I think that that's going to be interesting because, as I said, Latham's been up and down. And look, we know the organization knows this is not a profound scoop. They need a new right side of their O-line next year. That has to be the case. It's the tape tells you that you can't line up with Petit Frere and Radens as your right tackle and right guard next year. You can't. And obviously, Cushenberry, I assume, will be back, although he had an Achilles, right?
yeah, and
That's a tough injury. So,
that's really
uh,
tough.
yeah. So again, I can't speak to that. I'm not a doctor, but that's a tough injury.
Yeah,
But
for
they
anybody.
need a new right side. That's just a given.
Yeah, and they've been chasing that right side basically since Jack Conklin walked to Cleveland a couple of years ago. So
That's a great point. Yep. Yep.
quickly though, Greg, just sticking a little bit with Levis because we've talked about his ability to maneuver within the pocket, and the
Yep.
sack totals have been ghastly in these 4 games that he's been back. It wasn't awful on Sunday. He took two in particular, and I thought that he managed the pressure situation well. Or well enough, despite what was going on around him, and special teams and defense essentially, not giving him an opportunity to play the kind of game that they were seeking to play. I wonder what you made of his pocket presence specifically in this game and some of the throws that he was able to make while under duress.
Well, it's funny you say that because he had 39 dropbacks and he was not sacked while he was in the pocket. He got sacked twice when he sort of ran out of the pocket. And you can debate whether he should have or should not have, but the point is he was not sacked while he was in the pocket, which we've seen far too many times this year.
Mm.
You know, it's funny. He made some throws, both reads and throws, that I thought were really good. I mean, for instance, the Pollard 30-yard seam throw and the Westbrook-Ikhine 17-yard touchdown in the fourth quarter were the same play. And basically, it was a cover two play. They anticipated cover two. The Commanders play quite a bit of it. Dan Quinn basically plays cover one and cover two. Those are his most played coverages. So I'm sure they anticipated cover two both times. And essentially, what they did on both plays, and it really defines things for the quarterback, this was good offense, is they high load Bobby Wagner. Bobby Wagner is the middle hole defender in cover two, and they high load him. They took it both came out of empty, and they took number three to trips, had him run right at Wagner. So Wagner could not sink and get depth. So he had to sit there because he's the middle hole defender. So he had to sit and react to number three from trips. And then from the other side, number two to twins ran the seam behind Wagner. So it was basically the same play both times. And they were both really well thrown balls. The Pollard's seam and the Westbrook-Ikhine second touchdown, not the first one. The first one was beautiful. The first one's a spot throw, so people understand that. He's not waiting for Westbrook-Ikhine. It was basically kind of a condensed sluggo, concept. And you're throwing to his spot. That's the kind of thing where Ron Jaworski used to tell me with certain throws when I worked with him for, years and years, that, he could make those throws blindfolded because you're throwing to a spot. And that was placed perfectly because one thing I can do watching the tape is I can freeze it as the quarterback starts to separate his hands. And if you see where Westbrook-Ikhine was when Levis started to separate his hands to make the throw, he hadn't even really defined the route yet. So you're throwing that to a spot. That's a spot throw, but he placed it beautifully. He also made a tremendous throw under major duress to Boyd, which I thought was a big time throw. So he shows these traits, these ability to make really difficult throws. I think it was 16 yards, the one I'm talking about. It came on the first third quarter possession where Boyd ran the intermediate outcut from trips, and Levis was under great duress because Pollard kind of had a poor block on Wagner. Brunskill kind of missed Luvu. So you remember the play, I'm sure. He was under tremendous duress, and he just put it beautifully with pace and touch, and he put it right on Boyd's hands. Those are the kinds of plays where you go, that's pretty good. That's NFL quarterbacking.
That's basically what this season has become. Can they determine whether this player can quarterback at a relatively high NFL level? And, so far through this last month since he's been back, signs are promising. We'll see
I would
how.
agree. I would agree. And then and you have to be fair. I mean, and again, like I said, we're not saying he's the guy, the future set for 10 years. We don't know that. But there's been a clear sense that it's moving at least in the right direction.
I'm just trying to figure out my 2025, Greg. I don't know about 10 years from now or anything
You're just
like
trying
that.
to figure out your next radio show, Buck, you know?
That's what I'm saying, baby. One day at a time, just like the football team. So from that to your point about the Jags, I've been joking, and I know that this is a radio kind of joke, not a Greg Cosell kind of joke, but this is the toilet bowl coming up on Sunday at Nissan Stadium between a 2-win Jags team and a 3-win Titans team. This game used to be specifically reserved for Thursday night football, but we'll get it in week 14 either way. Any thoughts quickly on Mac Jones, who obviously will quarterback the rest of the year for the Jaguars,
Yeah.
given that Trevor Lawrence was placed on injured reserve after that nasty hit by a former Titans linebacker, Azeez Al-Shaair, who's now with the Texans.
Yeah, it's a shame. This was kind of a lost year for Trevor Lawrence. It's a
Yeah.
shame. And my sense is they'll have a new coaching staff and we'll see where he goes because it's been kind of an up and down career. And I think the kid's got some talent, but we'll see where his career goes. He's going to be the quarterback. They paid him. So it's not as if he's not going to be there. Um, Mac Jones is a guy you need to get pressure on Jones. Jones is well, he can, every once in a while, maybe he can get out of the pocket. He's not that guy. So, and he's not tall. So you need to get bodies around him. This is a game to me where pressure becomes critical. You must get pressure on Jones. Now, obviously, the run defense wasn't very good this week. It was an odd game. It was not a great game for Jeffrey Simmons. It just was one of those games. He's a great player. No one's going to argue that. It just was there's a lot of games in the league. Every week, everybody's not phenomenal. It's just too hard to do that. He had a bad game. These things happen. Sweat was not really a big factor in this game either. I guarantee they'll play better this week. That's the way the league works. When good players or good teams have a bad week, they come back to being what they kind of are the next week. So they'll play better. So the key, stop the run, obviously, and put them in long yardage, and then you must get bodies around Mac Jones. He does not handle that very well.
Yeah, that will be critical to deciding whether this team is able to get their fourth win of the season or not, especially against a divisional opponent.
I'll
Greg,
tell
I
you, there's
know.
one thing I thought was interesting, and you're closer to this than I am,
Yeah.
that Worley started over Brown.
Yes, they really like Darryl Worley. Now, I think that's a familiarity thing. DiNardo
Okay,
had him in Baltimore for a couple of different stints.
he did.
They
That's right.
really
That's right. Good
they
point.
really liked the way that he filled in for Amani Hooker after the illness knocked him out of that Texans game.
Yeah.
And then, Greg, I'm sure you noticed that he moved to the nickel after Roger McCreary
Yes.
ended up getting an injury there. So they do like a little bit more of the versatility. Brown's going
Well,
to
and
play.
Worley, don't forget,
Worley is,
Worley came into the league as a corner.
yeah.
So, yeah. And now is McCrary out this week?
No, he is on the injury report. We haven't had a final determination on that yet.
Okay, so there's a chance he could be back.
Yeah, I mean, their injury report as long as everybody's is in week 14, but it's that there is a general sense of optimism that Roger will be available.
Well, it's funny. This gets into what happened last week as well, and they chose to play a ton of nickel versus 12 personnel, and that's a coaching decision. And you know me well enough to know that I don't sit here and say it's right or wrong because they certainly know better than I.
Hmm.
But obviously when you have McCrary playing the slot and not an extra big guy, you can get hurt in the run game. That is a byproduct of choosing to play that way. And unless you're a slot corner, like the Eagles have Cooper DeJean, who's 6'1.5" and 210 or whatever, McCrary's not that guy. So and I love McCrary. I think he's tough, competitive, physical, all those good things. I think he's one of the better slots in the league. But he's not 220 pounds,
Yeah. He
So
can't do to Derrick Henry what Cooper DeJean did over the weekend to Derrick
no,
Henry.
he can't. He can't. That was overblown a bit, but Cooper DeJean is a really, really physical player, and he's big.
Yeah.
But the point is that they chose to, Denard Wilson chose to go that route, and obviously that was thought about during the week of preparation, and that's the way they chose to go because we know the Commanders do play out of multiple tight ends quite a bit. So that was a coaching decision, and they got hurt in the run game this week. I mean that's look, it happens. When all the you know what happens, when it starts rolling downhill at one time, you get a game like this. The two fumbles, the special teams, the run game, the run defense, which has been really good, just had a bad day. I mean,
Mm.
that's what you get.
Yeah, short fields and that particular offense do not
Yeah.
lend itself, especially with the tactics that they chose to approach Cliff Kingsbury's offense with last week. Greg, I know the Thursday night game as we tape this on Thursday morning is not going to be in the matchup show, but it is an awesome game between
Ah,
two
yeah.
NFC North opponents. The Packers are at the Lions later tonight. I guess just from your standpoint, because the Lions they're holding it down, right? 11-1. Their defense is in shambles a little bit, but they're doing the best that
Yeah.
they can. I wonder what you make of not just the job that Ben Johnson has done so far this year, because obviously he gets a lot of the headlines, but Aaron Glenn, I think,
Aaron
has done a
Glenn.
really commendable job with what he
Ah,
put together defensively.
yeah, and you have to know Aaron Glenn a little. Because he was obviously a first round pick and a great player in the league, and he's a tough, feisty, competitive individual. That's the way he wants his defense to look, and that's the way he wants his defense to play. So they play man coverage. They still pressure a lot. I mean, he's not a guy that sits back, and he's not a guy that's going to look at all the injuries because obviously Anzalone's out. They lost Rodriguez last week. So now they're obviously at linebacker having to play, a number of different people. They've gotten tremendous snaps and quality play from a kid named Nowaski who plays both on the ball and off the ball, and he's been a factor for them. But I will say this, they may have the best safety duo in the league in Brian Branch and Kirby Joseph. So on the back end, they're really good. And even Ali McNeil, the D tackle, not a name everybody knows, but a
Good
really,
player,
really good
though.
football player. But anyway, the point is that he's kept it together. They're still aggressive. If you look at a lot of the metrics, they're in the top five, top seven in the league. So, he's done an amazing job. And of course, their offense is their offense. We've discussed that. We don't need to discuss it. But, Green Bay's a solid football team on both sides. They're really a running football team as their starting point. And they're doing a lot of cool stuff in the run game with the pony package, two running backs, not a fullback. And they do a lot with Jaden Reed in terms of his movement before the snap of the ball. I mean, they do a lot of interesting stuff to get to basic plays, which is it's the old John Gruden phrase. I remember, talking to Gruden years ago when I did the book, and John he's one of the best to talk to. He could talk to you for a week straight, and he just talked about the illusion of complexity. And that's in a sense what the Packers do with all their personnel packages, their looks. It's the illusion of complexity, but they're running basic plays.
Yeah, no, to your point about LaFleur and the Packers offense there. I mean, obviously the ground game is a foundational part of what they want to accomplish, but I was just curious to see how much of the stuff that they were running with Malik Willis in the lineup would stick when Jordan Love
Well, the
came
run
back.
game stuff, I mean, the base run game, but not the pass game, you can do more with Love, obviously.
Right.
I mean, Love is, I mean, and every once in a while, he's reckless and undisciplined, and I'm not sure you want to coach that out of him because he also makes throws. I mean, he's a top five talent. Okay. Again, people hear me say that and they go, "What are you nuts? He's not a top five quarterback in the league." That's not what I said. He's a top five talent. The kid's 6'4", 220. Okay. That's a trait, by the way. That kind of size is a trait. Um, and he's got a gun and he can move. He's athletic. Is he perfect? Of course not. Sometimes he's a see it, throw it quarterback and he waits a little too long. Sometimes it gets him into trouble. Sometimes because he's got a power arm, he can overcome that and compensate for it. But just in terms of sheer physical traits, he is top five in the league.
NFL Matchup Show, of course, gets you ready for each and every week of football, save the Thursday night game. This week, Greg, in Week 14, there's a bunch of fun NFC games. The NFC is just a delightful mess
Yeah, it
this
is.
year at this point. I've really, really enjoyed some of the back and forth, and there are a couple of AFC games of note here. Really, one divisional one in the AFC West in particular. What piece would you like people to focus in on for the NFL Matchup Show that you're working on this week?
Oh, it's funny. Because it's not a great week of matchups, I ended up doing the Eagles because they won eight in a row, and obviously they're playing the Panthers, and that won't be viewed as one of the great matchups of the week. Although the Panthers are playing better, by the way.
Bryce Young is really, I mean, I know it's not translating to wins like we've talked about with Levis a little bit, but there's a lot of fun stuff in there.
Yeah, and their defense is interesting. It's not, it doesn't have great players, but it's interesting. But anyway, one thing that's really stood out, and I've noticed this with a lot more teams this year. I noticed it with the Steelers, for instance, as well, and they've got a matchup against the Browns. They just played 2 weeks ago. But is no huddle. A lot of teams are selectively using no huddle really effectively. And the Eagles are one of them. And I think that's one area where Jalen Hurts has really been effective. He really controls the game well at the line of scrimmage. They're not a passing team right now because the way their entire team is set up, they can play these kinds of games and wear teams out with a huge O line. They got the two biggest guards in the NFL. But they do such a good job with no huddle. Russell Wilson did a phenomenal job with no huddle this past week against the Bengals. And I think one reason you're seeing more of that, number one, the quarterback's in control, but number two, a lot of teams' defenses now more and more are using disguise and late rotation. And sometimes it's tough to get to all that when a team's in no huddle because you don't know when they're going to snap the ball. And you can't get caught with guys out of position on defense. So again, that's just a thought I have. Whether that's the reason teams use no huddle, I don't know for sure. But I feel like I'm seeing it more in the league selectively. I don't want people to think, teams are playing no huddle the whole game.
Yeah,
It's not college football. But but a lot of teams are more selectively using no huddle and having good success with it.
it's
So
tough to
anyway,
see.
I did a piece on that for the Eagles, and then I did the Rams offense this week, their pass game, because we've done a lot of Bills in the show, and obviously the Bills have won 8 in a row as well. But the Rams offense is their pass game. It's really a fun pass game. In some ways, it's like the Lions. It's just the spacing, the route concepts, the motion. There's just so many cool elements to what they do to create space between the numbers and between the hashes, and that's what you have to defend.
Yeah, no, to your point about just going back quickly to the tempo stuff. I mean, it's tough for teams to practice that, right?
Yeah,
Defensively. It's tough for you to replicate that, simulate that in
yeah.
practice. So I'm certain that has something to do with why teams are going to it, or at least why you might be identifying it from various teams more often than not here in the last couple of weeks. Greg, always a great pleasure to speak with you. I might have to start wearing blazers on the podcast now,
No,
Greg.
yeah,
You're outclassing me these last couple of weeks. I don't like it.
we shoot matchups, so I figured I'd try to raise the class element of our podcast.
Well, God knows you're going to have to do a lot of heavy lifting on that front, bud. You're the Tony Pollard of this podcast. You're definitely carrying the freight there. Buddy, always appreciate the time, and we'll do it again next week. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Buck. Appreciate it.